Under a sky painted red by the setting twin suns of Orcs 7, Sergeant Marcus Vance moved silently through the ruins of the battlefield, his boots crunching softly over shattered alloy and alien ash. The air still buzzed with the static hum of discharged plasma, and thick smoke curled between broken trees and the twisted remains of downed gunships. The war between the United Terran Forces and the Xerilian Empire had flared up again, without warning, and this remote planet had become its latest victim. Vance's orders had been clear secure the crash site of a fleeing Xerilian transport, rumored to carry high-value targets. As he approached the smoking wreck, his pulse remained steady, eyes scanning through the green tint of his HUD. The metal hull groaned as he pried open the door, and inside, surrounded by unconscious guards in silver-blue armor, stood a tall figure with skin that shimmered like obsidian glass. She wore ceremonial battle robes with glowing violet trim, and her silver hair flowed down in coils of perfect symmetry. Her eyes, bright as twin stars, locked with his, and her lip curled in disdain. "So this is the best humanity sends?" she said in a voice like cold metal. "A mute in armor?" Vance said nothing. He simply raised his plasma rifle, motioning her forward. Her name was Princess Vaylari of the Xerilian High Bloodline, known for her speeches before invasions and her pride in alien superiority. She refused to move. 2 steps forward, and he deployed a micro-imp from his gauntlet. A quick pulse disabled the energy seals in her armor. The hum of her defense field vanished, and her shimmering protection blinked out. Vaylari's confidence cracked. She stared at him, now aware of her vulnerability. Still, she kept her chin high, stepping from the wreckage with practiced grace, as though she allowed herself to be captured. "You'll regret this," she hissed, but Vance didn't react. The soldier kept moving, checking corners, leading her through the trees with a quiet efficiency that unsettled her more than shouting would have. Behind them, the wreck crackled and burned. For hours they moved through wilderness, scarred by war-twisted trees, craters glowing with strange lights, and shattered relics of ancient machines. Vaylari tried to keep up her arrogance, offering snide remarks about his silence, the weakness of humans, the futility of their resistance, but none of it landed. Marcus didn't take the bait. He never spoke. His calm unnerved her more than threats. When they rested by a stream beneath jagged cliffs, Vaylari's curiosity got the better of her. "Do you not speak because you're beneath me?" she asked, watching him inspect a map on his holopad. He glanced at her, still quiet, then tossed her a ration bar. She didn't take it. "Poison?" she asked. He unwrapped one for himself and took a bite, then returned to his work. For the first time, Vaylari had no reply. When night fell, the sounds of movement echoed in the wood's metal feet, distorted voices, scanning drones. "Xerilian search parties." Vaylari's face lit up. "They've come for me," she whispered. "You should run while you can." Marcus grabbed her arm, not cruelly, but with enough force to remind her who was in charge, and pulled her into the shadows of a broken transport. They watched together as a Xerilian scout walked past, scanning the area with a biosensor. Vaylari expected Marcus to panic, to breathe hard, or make a sound. But he remained still, a statue in the dark, not even blinking. When the drone left, she turned to him, confused. "Why didn't you reveal yourself?" You could have traded me for your freedom. Again, silence. She couldn't read him. He wasn't what the Empire had told her to expect. The next morning they found signs of a skirmish, a human squad wiped out, but not before taking down an entire Zarelian battle unit. Marcus knelt beside one of the fallen, placing a hand on the soldier's chest in silent respect. Velari watched him and for the first time didn't speak. They traveled again, and the terrain grew harsher. The skies darkened with smoke from burning forests, and strange blue lightning arced across the distant mountains. Velari tripped once, and Marcus caught her without hesitation. She pulled her arm back quickly, pride wounded, but a flicker of confusion crossed her face. Why help her? That night, while he rested, she found his datapad and tried to access it. Instead, a message blinked on the screen. Please don't. She stared at it, stunned. He had left it unlocked, knowing she'd try, and he still didn't stop her. He trusted her, or didn't fear her. She couldn't decide which was more frustrating. The next day, a thunderous roar cracked the sky. A Zarelian dreadfighter soared overhead, scanning the ground. Velari looked up with hope, but it passed without stopping. Her beacon, she realized, must be damaged. They didn't know where she was. Her confidence began to crumble. The silence from Marcus was no longer just annoying, it was powerful. It forced her to reflect on her own thoughts, her own doubts. And in that silence she realized something terrifying. The human soldier wasn't just a brute or a lucky survivor. He was trained, focused, and had likely faced horrors even she couldn't imagine. He didn't talk because he didn't need to. Every step he took, every decision, was calculated and effective. She remembered her own officers, loud, boastful, commanding. But this human had no need to shout. He simply acted. And things happened. That night, they camped near the ruins of a fallen orbital relay. Broken metal bones jutted from the earth like ancient statues. Velari sat beside the fire, staring into the flames, her voice quieter than before. "Why are you fighting us?" she asked. "Your people could surrender and be treated well. You don't have the strength to win." Marcus didn't look at her, but she thought she saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of pain or memory. She knew then he had lost people. Maybe a family, maybe a whole world. And yet here he was, carrying on. She finally fell silent, not because she ran out of things to say, but because she no longer believed them. The fire crackled between them. In the shadows of the wreckage, surrounded by a dead empire's machines and forgotten soldiers, the proud princess sat across from the quiet human. No chains held her, no weapons pressed against her back, but she did not run. She simply watched. Him, the silence between them, now heavier than words. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, and the war pressed on. But for the first time in her life, Princess Velari did not feel superior. She felt small, and she wondered who, truly, was the captive. The morning air was thick with smoke and heat, as Marcus Vance led Princess Velari deeper into the wildlands of Orcs 7, their path taking them across scorched ground and beneath skies that flickered with the eerie glow of distant battles. The terrain was rough, cracked stone, blackened trees, and the broken bones of machines littered the way forward, some still sparking with dying energy. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer empty. It pulsed with tension, confusion, and something neither of them could name. Valari followed without protest now, her long silver hair pulled back, her ceremonial robes dirtied by ash and torn by thorns. She had stopped making sharp comments the day before, and though pride still burned in her eyes, there was something else now: curiosity. Marcus moved ahead with purpose, always scanning the terrain, his instincts sharp as steel. They paused at a fallen tree, its roots twisted from some ancient explosion, and he signaled her to crouch. She obeyed without question. A drone passed overhead, its sleek Zarellian design gliding silently like a ghost bird. But Marcus had seen its shadow a moment before it arrived. He knew where to hide, how to move, how to breathe without being heard. Valari watched him as the drone disappeared. He had no technology stronger than hers, no armor as advanced, yet he kept her alive. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. They moved again, this time through a valley where the air shimmered with strange heat. Pools of green liquid bubbled beside shattered tanks, and the ground cracked underfoot, unstable and dangerous. Valari hesitated near a glowing crevice, but Marcus turned, held out his hand, and guided her across without a word. When they reached the other side, she almost thanked him, but the words caught in her throat. They rested in the shadow of a rock formation shaped like jagged claws. Valari sat on a broken piece of armor, brushing dirt from her legs, while Marcus checked a signal tracker from his pack. "Why do you keep going?" she asked suddenly, her voice softer than before. "There's no one out here. No squad. Number. Backup. You should have handed me over when the scouts passed. You had every reason to." He glanced at her, his face unreadable behind the visor, then returned to the tracker. "You think you're better than us," she said, standing. "But you're alone, just one man. What do you expect to do? Walk into my empire and win the war yourself? Still nothing." He stood, adjusted his weapon, and started walking again. Frustrated, she followed. The sun dipped lower as they climbed a ridge covered in shattered metal trees, remains of an old terraforming station, long destroyed. From the top, they saw smoke rising from the ruins of a human supply outpost below. Marcus froze. Valari stepped closer, eyes narrowing as she spotted movement in the ruins. "Zarellian patrol," she whispered. "They're searching for survivors." Marcus didn't hesitate. He ducked low and signaled her to stay behind. Then he slipped down the ridge like a shadow. She watched him weave through the wreckage, using fire and debris for cover. The Zarellians had numbers, but they were slow, loud, relying on tech that gave them strength, but no subtlety. Marcus, on the other hand, was a ghost. He crept up behind one, disarmed it with silent precision, and dragged it behind a wall before the others noticed. One by one he dismantled the patrol, using their own confusion against them. Valari could barely believe what she was seeing. This wasn't luck. This was training, purpose, discipline. When it was done, Marcus returned to her without a word, wiping a cut on his forearm. "You risked everything for what? Supplies?" she asked. But then she saw it beneath the rubble, a half-collapsed shelter. He pulled away broken panels and found 2 survivors, a woman holding a child and an injured soldier missing an arm. Valari stared in silence as Marcus helped them out, offering his last 2 water packs without hesitation. The woman looked at Valari with fear, but said nothing. The child clung to the soldier's arm. "You save them," Valari said, her voice unsteady. "Even though they can't help you." Marcus finally spoke, just 2 words. "They're human." His voice was low, rough from disuse, and filled with something she couldn't explain, like a memory carved in stone. They spent the night in the shelter, patching wounds and resting. The human survivors stared at Valari, unsure if she was friend or enemy, but they trusted Marcus, so they said nothing. In the early hours, while the others slept, Valari sat alone near the fire, staring into the flames. "They told me you were monsters," she whispered, "not to anyone in particular. That humans only cared for war and destruction. That you were angry children playing with weapons." She looked over at Marcus, who stood watch outside like a silent statue. "But you're more than that." The next morning, they left the survivors behind with supplies and coordinates to a friendly outpost. Valari and Marcus continued their march across the plains where firestorms rolled across the horizon and thunder growled like a living beast. As they walked, they passed a shattered monument, an old Zarelian outpost, crushed under a collapsed mountain. The words carved into its side had been scratched out, and in their place someone had written in Terran script, "We remember who we are." Valari stopped, staring at it. "You never gave up, did you?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer, but she saw the way his eyes lingered on the words. That night, as they climbed a narrow cliff path to avoid enemy scouts, Valari slipped, her foot catching on loose stone. She cried out, grabbing for the edge, but before she could fall, Marcus grabbed her wrist and pulled her back up. She stared at him, breathless. "You didn't have to," she said. "I'm your enemy." He looked at her for a long moment, then finally replied, his voice quiet but steady. "Not anymore." Her heart beat faster. Something in her chest shifted as if a door had opened. As they reached the top, the wind howled across the mountain pass. In the distance, the ruins of an ancient city flickered with strange light, an old battleground, and maybe the edge of enemy territory. Valari looked at Marcus, no longer with scorn or pride, but with respect. She didn't know what waited ahead, but she knew one thing now. This human was not the monster her empire claimed. He was something else entirely, something she couldn't yet understand. And as the fires of Orcs 7 blazed around them, she no longer felt like the one leading the way. The wind howled across the ruined edge of the ancient city as Marcus and Princess Valari reached the broken stone bridge that arched over a deep canyon of glowing mist, its depths hiding secrets lost for centuries, and the crackling energy in the air made every hair on Valari's arms stand upright as she stepped carefully behind Marcus, who studied the crumbling path with cautious eyes. The city beyond looked like a forgotten crown towers leaning in strange directions, walls split open by long dead wars, and glowing crystal veins running like scars across the ground, and something about it made Valari feel small in a way that had nothing to do with her capture. They didn't speak as they crossed, the silence between them no longer hostile, but filled with unspoken questions and buried thoughts. And when the far end of the bridge trembled under their boots, Marcus grabbed her hand and pulled her into a run just before a piece of stone collapsed into the swirling depths below, the sound vanishing into the mist like a swallowed scream. They entered the city slowly, moving through narrow alleys, where light filtered in strange colors through the broken arches above, and Velari found herself wondering how much of this place had been Zarelian once, or human, or something older. Something that neither side remembered, but had fought over anyway. A pulse of static tickled their comms, an old signal, flickering in and out, and Marcus tapped his scanner, showing her a weak distress beacon deep within the ruins, too faint to tell if it was friend or foe. Velari hesitated, sensing something strange in the air, but Marcus moved forward without fear, and she followed, drawn not just by the signal, but by the mystery that seemed to grow thicker with every step. As they reached the center of the ruins, the ground opened into a wide plaza, filled with ancient machines, their surfaces covered in moss and burn marks, and at the heart of the square stood a strange spire with a shattered top, humming quietly, like a machine half asleep. Velari stepped closer, staring at the markings on the base symbols that didn't belong to her people or the humans, old and sharp and almost alive, and when she placed her hand on one, the humming deepened, and a light flared within the spire, shooting upward in a flash that echoed across the ruins like thunder. Suddenly, a wave of force slammed outward, knocking both of them back, and Marcus hit the ground hard, his helmet flickering as it shut down for a moment. Velari tried to speak, to ask if he was okay, but no sound came from her mouth. Her eyes widened in panic as she grabbed at her throat, her lips forming words that vanished into silence. And when she looked at Marcus, he was already pushing himself up, coughing once before noticing her struggle. He reached her side, checking her quickly for injuries, but she shook her head and pointed to her mouth, then to her throat, the fear clear in her wide, glowing eyes. He understood. Whatever the spire had done, it had taken her voice. She tried to activate her wrist communicator, but it sparked uselessly, and her attempts to write in the dust were interrupted by another low hum from the spire. Marcus turned, raising his weapon slowly, as the light at the top of the spire began to shift and twist, forming a shape of projection, maybe, or something worse. A figure appeared, made of light and static, its face a blend of alien and machine, and it spoke in a voice that wasn't a language but a feeling, sorrow, warning, memory. Images flashed in the air around them, cities falling into fire, stars breaking apart, machines swallowing life and then turning to dust, and Velari watched in horror as scenes of her own empire's conquests mixed with human wars, each side shown not as heroes but as echoes of the same mistake. She reached out, her hand trembling, as the projection focused on her, and in that moment she saw it all, the truth behind the war, the ancient force that had once ruled this part of the galaxy, the cycle of power and pride and destruction that neither side had broken, only inherited. Marcus looked at her. His expression changed, not angry or triumphant, but full of something deeper, something like understanding, and she lowered her hand slowly, her pride melting away beneath the weight of everything she had just seen. Then the light faded, and the plaza fell silent again, except for the soft wind that carried dust across the broken stones. Velari touched her throat once more, trying to speak, but the silence remained, not painful but strange, like a choice she had made without knowing. Marcus helped her stand, and they walked slowly out of the plaza, back into the ruins, neither speaking, though now she wished she could. They made camp in a hollow beneath a shattered dome, where stars peeked through the holes in the ceiling. And as the fire crackled, Vailari tried again to communicate, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, a spire, a figure, a question mark, but Marcus only nodded, then reached into his pack and pulled out a small data slate, sliding it to her. She stared at the screen for a long time, then typed. It showed me everything. The truth. He read it and gave a small nod. Me too. She typed again, slowly. Why didn't you speak more before? He hesitated, then typed back. Sometimes silence says more. She sat quietly, the slate resting in her lap, and, for the first time since her capture, she felt something strange peace. The next day, they left the city behind, marching through fields of glass and bone where the sky shimmered with storms and shadows. Vailari no longer walked like a prisoner. She walked beside him. And though her voice was gone, her thoughts were louder than ever. They had seen the same vision. They had walked through fire, through silence, and into something neither of them fully understood. But they walked together now, and that, more than anything, had changed everything. The sky above was dark and full of heavy clouds as Marcus and the voiceless Princess Vailari continued their journey across the wastelands beyond the ruined city. The memory of the spire and the ancient vision still fresh in their minds, a truth that neither of them could forget no matter how far they walked. The silence between them was no longer cold, but thoughtful, filled with shared meaning that no longer needed words. And though Vailari could not speak, she found herself listening more than ever before, not with her ears, but with her eyes, and heart learning from every step Marcus took, from every quiet gesture, from the way he offered her food before feeding himself, and the way he always kept watch through the night without complaint, while she sat near the fire and thought about the kind of war she had once believed in. They passed through a narrow valley where old machines lay like broken statues, half buried in dirt and rust, some still bearing the banners of her empire, their once proud symbols now cracked and faded, and Vailari stared at them as if they were ghosts whispering of the past. When they came across the body of a young human soldier lying beneath the remains of a transport ship, Marcus stopped and silently knelt beside him, removing a small data tag from the boy's chest and pressing his hand to the ground in a quiet moment of respect, and Vailari watched with a tight chest, surprised by how her eyes burned with emotion for someone she had never known, someone who had once been her enemy. They walked further until the terrain turned harsh, a wide desert of red sand and sharp wind, the sun above burning hot during the day and freezing cold at night. And food supplies began to run low. Marcus divided the last protein ration in half and gave her the larger piece without hesitation, and though she tried to push it back to him, he only shook his head with a small smile that told her this was not a gift but a choice, and she took it with silent thanks, feeling the weight of every kindness he gave her. On the fifth night, as the cold wind howled around them, they saw firelight in the distance, a human outpost, still alive, still standing, though barely its perimeter lights flickering and its towers slumped from past attacks, and Marcus signaled her to stay hidden while he approached slowly, holding up his ID tag. Guards appeared on the wall, shouting, but then lowered their weapons as they recognized him, pulling him inside while Vailari waited in the shadows, unsure what would happen next. Moments later he returned, motioning for her to follow, and Though some soldiers stared with suspicion when they saw her, none of them raised their weapons, because Marcus was known here, respected, and his word still held weight, even if he arrived with an alien princess at his side. Inside the outpost, the air was dry and full of smoke, the scent of burned wiring and machine oil everywhere, and Velari looked around in wonder as human engineers worked on battered drones. Medics treated wounded civilians, and children huddled together with wide eyes, their faces thin from hunger but still bright with hope. And it struck her deeply that despite everything, the war, the loss, the pain, these people still built, still protected, still believed in something more than survival. Marcus spoke with the commander, a tired woman with a metal arm and sharp eyes, who looked at Velari and narrowed her gaze, but didn't question his decision, only nodded and gave orders to bring them food and water. And as they sat in the corner of the mess hall, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and whispered voices, Velari felt something she had not expected: safety, not as a prisoner, but as someone welcome. Later, as the soldiers slept and the halls grew quiet, Velari walked alone through the outpost, her steps slow and thoughtful, and she passed a wall where messages and drawings had been left, notes to lost loved ones, sketches of hope, poems written in shaking hands, and her eyes caught one small sentence, written by a child's hand. "We are still here." Her fingers brushed the words, and she closed her eyes, remembering the pride her people once had, the belief that they were stronger, smarter, destined to rule. But here, in this broken place full of fire and courage, she saw something greater: the human spirit, the will to rise again even after being shattered. In the morning, the outpost was attacked. A Zarelian scout ship had found their trail, and explosions rocked the earth as weapons fired from the skies, cutting through the early sunlight and sending smoke pouring into the air. Marcus grabbed his rifle and led the defense, barking orders as soldiers rushed to the walls, and Velari, despite being unarmed and voiceless, ran to help, dragging wounded back to cover and throwing herself over a child to protect him. When a blast tore through the west gate, dust and fire filled the air, and the sounds of war returned, loud and sharp. But this time, she wasn't watching from above as a royal heir. She was in it, with them, part of something real. The outpost fought hard, Marcus like a machine as he moved across the battlefield, saving lives, covering others, refusing to fall. And Velari couldn't look away, her chest tight with something unfamiliar: respect. Yes, but more than that something. Close to awe. When the enemy's ship was finally driven off and silence fell over the damaged walls, the survivors began to cheer weakly, their bodies bruised and tired, but their faces filled with relief. And Marcus stood among them like a symbol of their endurance. Velari approached him slowly, her clothes torn, her hands covered in soot, and she reached out to touch his arm, looking into his eyes with meaning deeper than words. And though she could not speak, he understood. He always understood. That night, as they sat under the cracked sky and shared a piece of stolen peace, Velari took the data slate and wrote something for him. "You fight because you believe in something, not just to win." Marcus read it, nodded, and then wrote back, "We fight for each other. That's the difference." She stared at his answer for a long time, her fingers tightening around the slate, and in that moment she realized that the war had changed, not because of weapons or victories, but because of people like him who refused to give up even when everything was lost. She looked at him again, really looked, and knew that what she had once mocked, she now admired. The human spirit was not made of steel or fire, but of stubborn hope, endless courage, and the will to do what was right, even when it was hard. And now, though her voice was gone, her heart was full, and she knew that somehow this was only the beginning. The morning sun broke through thin clouds as smoke still drifted over the battered human outpost, casting long shadows across its damaged walls while soldiers repaired defenses and cleared debris. But Marcus knew peace would not last. Princess Vailari stood beside him at the edge of the platform, her sharp eyes locked on the northern sky, where faint lights shimmered unnaturally, signs of an approaching force. And though she could not speak, the tension in her expression said everything her empire was coming. Inside the command tent, the old radios buzzed with intercepted signals, and the news was grim. A Xerilian dread cruiser had entered low orbit, likely tracking Vailari's signal, and with it came a full squadron of shock troops who would soon arrive to reclaim what they believed was theirs, not only the princess, but the planet itself, and the outpost stood directly in their path. Marcus stared at the map, knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned, but retreat meant death, and surrender was not an option. He turned to Vailari, who had followed him silently, and he handed her the data slate, watching as she quickly typed. "My father has sent the Black Wing." He felt the weight of those words. He had heard of the Black Wing, the most feared unit in the Empire, loyal only to the Empress and known for leaving no survivors. And as he looked into Vailari's steady gaze, he knew she feared them, not because they were strong, but because they would show no mercy, not even to her. Outside, the defenders prepared for battle, reinforcing barricades and checking weapons, and Marcus gathered a small team of engineers to reroute the old artillery systems that hadn't fired in years, while Vailari walked among them, helping, silently lifting cables, delivering supplies, and standing beside injured soldiers without a trace of pride. Even the youngest recruits no longer saw her as a threat, but as one of them. As the first scout drones appeared on the horizon, dark shapes slicing through the clouds, Marcus ordered the outpost into full lockdown, and the walls echoed with the hum of energy shields activating, but it was only a matter of time before they fell. That night, Vailari could not sleep, her mind full of faces from her childhood teachers, guards, and her mother, the Empress herself, who had trained her to lead not with compassion but with strength, who had once told her mercy is a chain, never wear it. Yet now, sitting beside Marcus in the dim corner of the medbay, as he tended to a boy with a broken arm, she saw more power in gentleness than in any weapon she had ever held. Suddenly an alert rang out movement in the outer desert, and Marcus rushed to the main wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder, and peered through binoculars. A single Xerilian walker was advancing, black as ash, its armor marked with the insignia of the Black Wing, and at its head marched a tall figure in ceremonial crimson, one of the Empress's royal agents. Vailari stepped forward, and though her face remained calm, Marcus saw her hands tremble slightly as she typed on the slate. "That is Commander Threx. If he sees me here, he will destroy everyone." Marcus glanced at her, then out at the distant shape again, and made a choice. He would not hand her over, not even to save the outpost. Instead, he ordered the outer gates sealed, and the anti-tank mines activated. Threx's walker came to a halt just outside the range of the cannons, and from its side, a voice boomed across the sands using a wide-band frequency. "Deliver the traitor princess, or be burned from the earth." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft whine of charging weapons. Marcus replied on the same channel, his voice calm. "She's not your prisoner anymore. If you want her, you'll have to take us all." The pause that followed was long and cold. Then Threx responded with a single word: "Understood." The walker retreated, and Marcus knew it was not over but only beginning. For the next 2 hours the outpost became a fortress, every hand working to prepare, and Valori moved with purpose, not as a royal, but as a soldier. She mapped out old Xyrillian tech patterns, identified weak points in the likely approach, and even found a buried relay that could be used to boost their comms. Then the sky lit up with the blue fire of atmospheric entry dropships falling like stars, scattering the sand, and the final assault began. Explosions rocked the earth as the Black Wing descended in perfect formation, lines of armored soldiers moving like machines, their weapons cutting through the outer defenses, and Marcus led the front line with fire in his eyes, refusing to give up ground even when their shields began to fail. Valari stayed in the command tower, relaying orders with the slate, her hands moving fast as she fed Marcus data on enemy movements. And when the tower was struck by a plasma bolt, she shielded a medic with her body, earning a burn down her side but refusing to leave her post. The outpost held longer than anyone expected, but slowly, surely, the Black Wing pushed closer, and Marcus knew the last wave was coming when Threx himself stepped through the smoke, leading a charge of elite troopers toward the core gate. With the command center breached, the end seemed near until Valari, limping and bleeding, climbed to the broken platform and activated the outpost's old broadcasting system. Her voice, gone for days, suddenly returned, not with full strength, but enough for one message, raspy and fierce. "Commander Threx, this is Princess Valari. I renounce the throne. I reject the Empire, and I order you to stand down." The words echoed across the battlefield, freezing the Black Wing in place. Their code was unbreakable, their loyalty tied not to blood, but to command, and a command had just been given. Threx stepped forward, lifting his helmet, his face carved from stone, and stared up at her for a long moment. "Is this truly your will?" he asked. She nodded once, though the pain nearly broke her. Threx turned to his troops and raised his hand, and to everyone's shock, the Black Wing lowered their weapons. The battle was over. The silence that followed was unreal. Then cheers broke out from humans, and even stunned Xyrillians, who had never imagined a princess would do such a thing. Marcus ran to her as she collapsed, catching her before she fell, and the medics rushed in. That night, as the fires died and the wounded were treated, the outpost became a place of strange peace. Valari lay in the med bay, weak but alive, and Marcus sat beside her. Her voice was gone again, but her eyes said everything. She had turned against her empire's shadow and lit a new fire in its place, one that even the stars would notice. The sky over the outpost was calm now, a strange peace resting on the broken towers and scorched ground where just days before smoke and fire had ruled. But deep beneath that calm, everyone knew something had changed forever, not just the battlefield. but the balance of the stars themselves for Velari. Once the proud princess of the Zerelian Empire had chosen not power, but people, not the throne, but a truth she had only discovered through fire. And now, though her voice was nearly lost, and her body still healing, word of her actions had spread like a rising wind across both human and Zerelian channels, reaching rebels hiding on distant moons, soldiers still loyal to the Empire, and diplomats trapped in a war with no end, each one asking the same question, what happens now? Inside the command room, Marcus stood beside a cracked table, reading the latest intercepted messages. Human leaders wanted to speak with Velari, some with hope, others with suspicion, while Zerelian warlords, unsure of her true loyalty, debated whether to label her a traitor or a potential symbol of peace. And in the center of it all, Velari herself sat silently, her face pale, her eyes thoughtful, not afraid but burdened by a weight she had never carried before, a responsibility not given by blood, but earned through choice. When Marcus handed her the latest request from a human council that had formed to begin peace talks, she read it slowly, then took the data slate and wrote just 5 words. Then I must meet them. The journey to the neutral meeting site was long and tense. A quiet flight aboard a salvaged diplomatic shuttle escorted by both human fighters and Zerelian defectors who had sworn loyalty to no flag but her own. And Marcus stayed close, watching her carefully as they passed the edge of orbit, where stars looked cold and distant, and nothing felt certain anymore. The meeting place was an ancient space station, floating between worlds, untouched by war yet filled with scars of old battles. And as Velari stepped onto the docking bridge, every camera turned toward her, not as a prisoner now, not as a ruler, but as something new, something no one yet understood. She entered the main hall, where leaders waited behind thick glass and armored guards, their expressions cautious, their hearts guarded. And when she approached the speaking platform and activated the old microphone, the room held its breath. Her voice, though faint and cracked, came through clearly enough. I am Velari of Zur. I was raised to believe humans were lesser, that unity came only through control. But I have seen with my own eyes that your people fight not for conquest, but for each other. I have seen strength in your kindness and honor in your loss. I do not speak today as a princess. I speak as someone who has lived in both your world and mine. And I say this, there can be peace, if we choose it. The hall remained silent for a long time after her words faded, but slowly, one by one, hands began to rise not to argue, but to vote, and the result was clear. The talks would begin. But peace, as Marcus reminded her later, was not born in one speech or one vote. It would take time, patience, and more strength than war ever demanded. And Velari knew he was right. Over the weeks that followed, she worked with human envoys and Zerelian rebels, drafting messages, giving interviews, guiding new policies, and all the while dealing with the shadows of the empire she had left behind. There were threats from old commanders, sabotage attempts, and even a bounty placed on her by unknown forces, but she refused to hide, refusing to run from the consequences of her choice. At her side, Marcus remained her protector and friend, no longer just a soldier, but something more, her equal, her anchor, and the only person who truly understood how far she had come. Together they visited burned cities and refugee camps, met orphans and survivors, and everywhere they went, people looked at Velari not with fear, but with wonder, a princess no longer of one world, but of two, trying to bring both into the light. One night, as they stood on the observation deck of a rebuilt station orbiting Earth, she watched the blue planet spin below, her hand resting lightly against the glass, and she asked softly, "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, then said, "They already are, one person at a time." In that quiet, she finally allowed herself to breathe, not because the danger was gone, it wasn't, but because she had found something stronger than fear, purpose. In the weeks that followed, a treaty began to form, thin and fragile like new glass, but real, and it was agreed that both sides would form a joint exploration council to seek new worlds together, not as enemies but as allies. And when the final day of the summit came, and Velari stepped once more into the hall where it all began, she saw banners not of war, but of hope, new symbols, combining both human and Xyrillian emblems, woven together for the first time. As she placed her signature on the final agreement, people cheered not because peace was perfect, but because it had begun. Outside, as she prepared to board the shuttle with Marcus and return to the surface, she saw children watching through the glass, some human, some alien, none of them old enough to remember the first bombs. And as she raised her hand to wave, she realized what her title truly meant now, not a ruler, not a symbol of the old empire, but a bridge between worlds, and a promise that even the deepest scars could one day heal. The princess who had once mocked a human soldier was now the one who stood beside him, rebuilding the future, and though the road ahead would not be easy, it would be walked together. Velari, princess of two worlds, had found her voice again, not in sound, but in action, and through her the stars no longer seemed so far apart.